programs. Case studies of how campuses have revamped and updated underperforming collection bin infrastructure. A College and University Recycling Coalition webinar. My name is Kay Johnston, and I direct the Office of Sustainability at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and I'll be your moderator today. This webinar is a part of our free CURC technical webinar series, which are designed to provide trends, information, perspectives about recycling. We are hosting these webinars every other month on the first Thursday from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we want to go to that next slide, to the sponsors. Before we get started, I want to thank the Alcoa Foundation for their sponsorship of the 2015 webinar series, as well as today's program sponsor, Recyclemania. Their support allows us to make these free webinars possible. We also want to thank Keep America Beautiful and ASHE, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, for the planning and promotional support for this series. First, we have a few housekeeping notes to go over for today's webinar. If you have technical problems during the webinar, you can call GoToWebinar's customer support line at 800-263-6317. That's 800-263-6317. Because of the size of the audience, all of your lines are muted, but you can submit questions at any time using the questions panel on the right side of your screen. Simply click the plus symbol to type your questions, and we will read these out loud when we get to the end of the presentations. If you have a note to share with organizers, use the chat function at the bottom of your control panel to send a note to us. One final note, we will be placing the slides and a recording of the webinar on the CURC website within the next few days so that you can review the session or share it with your colleagues. Alrighty, let's get started. I am pleased to be joined today by 5 great speakers. Joshua Elner, Recycling Technician at Arizona State University. Larry Cook, Recycling Coordinator, University of South Carolina. Matthew Hirota, Waste Reduction Recycling Coordinator, University of California, Merced. Kris Ferguson, Recycling Coordinator, George Washington University. And Alec Cooley, Director of Recycling Services at Keep America Beautiful. Today's webinar is about revamping and optimizing underperforming collection programs with a particular focus on bin infrastructure. Recycling and organic collection programs have to stay current with industry trends and the needs of the campus. It's important to periodically evaluate the effectiveness of existing programs in order to know if they are capturing the right materials in an efficient and very cost-effective way. This program will highlight examples of universities that have found problems with existing programs and undertook efforts to revamp them. So let's go to the opening slide for Joshua, and I'd like to introduce Josh Elner. He is a recycling technician. He has the recycling technician position at Arizona State University. He has been working in facilities management for community colleges and universities for 12 years. He grew up in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, and shortly after receiving a bachelor's degree from the University of Oregon, where he studied sociology and political science, he moved to Arizona. He quickly learned the culture of solid waste in the Southwest was much different than that of the Pacific Northwest. And because of this, he wanted to direct his energy toward shifting the cultural view to be one where waste was seen as a resource. Although Josh enjoys the continual changing aspects of solid waste management at the university level, he considers himself most comfortable in areas of remote wilderness with his family and often enjoys multifamily endurance, mountain biking, and backpacking excursions. Welcome.
Thanks, Kay. I'm excited to be here today and present on everyone's behalf who's worked with this program. As many of you know, programs like this don't really just come together. There's a lot of effort that goes into it. And thanks for everyone else who's presenting today, because I always get so much from the insight from other campuses. With that said, I'll go into a little bit of our program background. Thanks for changing the slide. It began in 2013. The goal was to collect used espresso and coffee grounds from commercial coffee vendors on campus and put them to use as natural fertilizer and soil amendment on ASU's main campus. This is really a case of dialing a system in. As the needs changed, we changed the infrastructure of the program. The partners on campus have been ASU Grounds, our campus food vendor, who's Aramark, who controls all of the coffee vendors, and ASU Recycling. And really everyone who purchases coffee from participating retail locations is participating in this program, so it's really a campus-wide thing. And Aramark has been a great partner with a lot of changes to their internal processes. Next slide. A little bit of more background. Collection occurs at most retail locations serving coffee, which is roughly 20 locations, and it's centralized down by the Aramark staff into 2 outdoor collection areas, so it makes it real easy for us to pick up. Coffee grounds are either collected and applied directly to tree wells and flower beds or added into a larger pile of finished compost. And that's kind of the back of the house end of it. That's the process that recycling and grounds goes through to use it as a resource. The volunteer program from ASU Grounds Department picks up, directly applies to coffee grounds, and we'll see how this is made possible later in the presentation. We're roughly picking up about 2,000 pounds or a ton a week of used coffee grounds, which is pretty cool. Next slide. So before all this was possible, the grounds department, there were a couple groundskeepers who were thinking, what can we do to help our turf on campus? And I'd like to add that ASU Grounds doesn't use any harmful or potentially harmful fertilizers on campus, so they use compost, compost tea, fish oil, and now coffee grounds. So they're not using high concentrated amounts of nitrogen or anything else, which is something to be said, especially in the state of Arizona. So you can see in the pictures, they did a 2-week study, not super scientific, but it was enough for the grounds department to feel that applying coffee grounds directly to the grass was beneficial. You can see it is a little bit greener. Like I said, not super scientific, but they went with it. Next slide. So in the collection process, these are the 3 problems that we've encountered. 1 being collection methods and transportation, 2 being contamination in those grounds, and 3, ownership and responsibility, who does what and who's responsible for which part of the process. I'll go over some of the bins that we've used from implementation up until the last change we've made, which was about 3 months ago. The first 2 problems, collection of methods and transportation and contamination, really forced us to make changes in those bins that we were using to collect the grounds. The third problem, which was ownership and responsibility, there was really a transition period when grounds crew transitioned responsibility of the pickups, not the application, but just the pickups, to the recycling crew. And it was kind of like the recycling crew was helping out when we could, grounds was still doing it sometime, and it was really the SOP for that, the operating procedure, was the official notice, so to speak, of when we transitioned the pickups officially. So next slide, please. So this is our first collection bin. the groundskeepers, like I said, they started this program on top of their regular duties, and they really went above and beyond when they did this. It was pretty innovative. The program grew exponentially, and we needed a new bin pretty quick. This first collection bin was insufficient volume for the amount being generated. It required daily maintenance, and it was really highly contaminated without a lid, and with half the sign being covered up there. You can imagine how much other stuff we got in. It just looked like another waste receptacle. So next slide. With that, we went to these larger bins. Collection bin was a 96-gallon toter, and it really fixed the problem of low volume. We had, enough room in there for 4 weeks worth of coffee at that time. The lid allowed for more visible signage and lower contamination, and the larger volume allowed for the container to be emptied only once per week, which is really nice. But with fixing the one set of problems, we really created another set in which these bins got really heavy. Wet coffee grounds are extremely heavy material. They were really topping with scales at probably about 400 pounds apiece, and at that point, the volunteers could no longer empty them. Even our own grounds crew and recycling crews were really stressed out as far as being able to safely handle this material. So we started with one of these containers, and as it was filling up, we'd add another one, so we would split the volume and weight into 2 containers, and it got to the point where we were collecting so many coffee grounds, or are collecting so many coffee grounds, that we had 4 of these 96-gallon toters, and they were filling up every week. So it needed a little bit further dialing in. So the cons of the collection number 2, the 96-gallon toters, is that they became extremely heavy and unsafe to handle. Moist coffee starts to smell sour. It kind of starts fermenting if it's staying in plastic bags for a week in the Arizona heat. So it needed, like I said, it needed a little further dialing in, which brings us to the next slide. In collection number 3, which would be 44-gallon brutes with the snap-on lids. So it's obviously less volume than the 96-gallon toters, but it still works with a twice-a-week pickup. Low contamination with the signage and lid. It works pretty well. To tell you the truth, I do the pickups on a regular basis, and I haven't really experienced much contamination at all. Maybe a rogue plastic bottle or something, but that's pretty easy to get out of there. Twice-a-week pickup keeps the coffee grounds from starting to smell sour or starting to ferment. The low weight of these containers and wheels allows for volunteers coming. Our grounds landscaping department has a volunteer program, and so they'll actually take these straight from the dock and apply them directly to the herb garden and flower gardens. So these lower weight containers are much easier transported by them. So this change was made right after the grounds department gave us the responsibility, the recycling department, to pick up the grounds from the back of the dock, mainly because we have equipment, trucks, and everything to do it, and it was, the program came a long way from picking up a little container every day to, handling, over 10 tons of material a year. Next slide, please. And with that transition from the grounds department having a major say in the transportation to the recycling program taking over that collection, there were lines that needed to be drawn just for responsibility and just so everyone was on the same page, so to speak. Recycling has become the main campus or customer contact, but everyone still has an equal responsibility in the entire cycle of the material. Like I said, those 3 partners, we all have an equal responsibility, and the program wouldn't take place if anyone was to drop out. If Aramark stopped doing such a great job at collecting it from their vendors and their indoor locations, then it wouldn't be effective. And if the grounds landscaping department stopped applying it, it wouldn't be effective either. So it's really all 3 of these programs and departments are working together to get this done. So I guess I'll read through this ownership. Grounds department was collecting from the centralized locations, those 2 outdoor locations, from early 2013 until early 2015. Recycling program took over, or really relieved, the grounds rather than took over the collection in early 2015, and we made a few changes right out of the gate, and that was bins, signage, frequency of pickup, and we wrote the standard operating procedure. Next slide. Which I'm not going to go over the entire operating procedure. I believe this will be available in PDF, so you can go back and take a look at it if you are interested in seeing this. But really, the first part of it is objective, purpose, which was kind of what I went over in the beginning of the presentation. The material flow is pretty defined, and so anyone interested in that can just take a look. I'm not going to go through everything here, but the responsibilities and accountability is really nice, because when we get a complaint or something like that, it's really easy to pinpoint who's responsible and accountable for making that change, who needs to jump on it, so to speak. The volunteer program is a part of the grounds department, and they've really been helping out, really actually relieving a lot of the responsibilities that the recycling program has to do, because they can just take it directly from the dock and apply it to the flower and herb gardens. This is really a comprehensive and step-by-step process. It also gives, I like having this operating procedure, because not only does it give responsibilities, but it also gives credit where credit is due. And you can see that everyone here plays an equal role in getting this material reused or recycled. So next slide. To start wrapping up, the lessons learned, really contamination can be minimized with proper lids and signage. Just a little bit of engagement there with a lid and the signage. The lid makes someone think twice about what they're reading on the sign. Smaller bins with wheels allow for ease of transportation in bins and ensures volunteer safety. No more heavy bins. You know, we did have to go to twice-a-week pickup with those smaller bins, but it's kind of, that's the cost of doing business safely. Third bullet point there, maximizing efficiency and routing. Daily pickup was too much, but weekly wasn't enough. This is really the happy medium, twice a week. It eliminates those odors and allows for the bins not to be so heavy. And then the operating procedure, it just guides ownership and gives credit where credit is due. And you can see the picture there. It's pretty cool. It's some of the volunteers that have just wheeled that 44-gallon brute over to the trees and are direct applying there. Next slide. Improved results. With all those changes that we made, we're getting less contamination, in which processing times are much faster and yield is greater without that contamination. Enabling volunteers to move coffee grounds from back of dock directly applying to the site cuts our hauling and storage times. We're just not, instead of handling it twice, we're handling it once. And that makes things a lot easier. The operating procedure has allowed us to pinpoint responsibilities and fix small problems quickly. And like I was saying earlier, that operating procedure also gives credit where credit is due. You can see everyone's role and how much all three partners work to get this job done. I realized that was kind of quick, and really just the structure of the program. I hope everyone understood.
I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Couple of questions, Josh.
Yes.
That kind of come out of this. Our coffee grounds are known to be acidic, and how do you deal with that? As well as, it sounds like you're putting fresh coffee grounds on landscaping in other areas, and do you use at all composted coffee grounds?
Okay, so a couple questions there. I'll try to address them.
I'm going to make it more complicated. There's a third part to this. What do you do with filters?
So filters, as you can see actually in this slide, filters rarely make it into what is being picked up. So they're taken care of by the vendor at the retail location. They're probably being composted at this point just in our regular organics compost stream. To answer that last one first. The other questions were how do we deal with the acidity? From my understanding, and this is what those groundskeepers told me early on, is that coffee is acidic, but the grounds afterwards are only slightly acidic. And they didn't feel as if that acidity was detrimental to the turf. Again, I'm not a chemist or anything. I'm not exactly sure what the pH levels are of those grounds. And Kate, can you go over those other? There are still two questions, but I don't know.
Yes. The other questions were do you compost any? Because it looks like you're using all fresh coffee grounds.
Correct. Yes, they're all fresh coffee grounds. When the volume came to be such a great volume, we considered just putting the coffee grounds and filters directly into our organics compost stream, which there's I think it's a 25-yard compactor for on the back of our Memorial Union, our food service. But we decided to keep this program just because it engaged so many of those volunteers, and it was a direct application. So we predominantly are direct applying fresh coffee grounds.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. I'm sure there are a lot of other questions about your program, but let's move on. Let's go ahead. Thank you so much. Opening slide for Larry Cook. Larry Cook is a recycling coordinator in the facilities department at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, South Carolina, a position he has held since 2012. Prior to his current position, Larry was executive director of the North Chickamauga Creek Conservancy in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he worked on a wide variety of conservation projects, including backcountry and greenway trail development, water quality restoration, land conservation, and invasive species abatement. At South Carolina, he has spearheaded many new initiatives to standardize collection across campus, improve educational programming, expand access to recycling, and foster collaboration between university units, especially athletics. Larry and his wife Amber live in Columbia and are proud parents of their 9-month-old baby Gibbs. Larry began a 3-year term on the CURC Board of Directors in June of 2015. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you, Kay. I'm excited to share some of what we're doing here at the University of South Carolina, especially as it relates to how we promote recycling and reuse during office cleanouts and moves. So I'll start with a couple of campus statistics for those of you who aren't really familiar with our campus. We have about 31,000 students, which of course fluctuate semester to semester. Over 6,000 faculty and staff members here on the Columbia campus. We are a 400-acre urban campus tucked into the city behind the State House. So we've got a lot of activity on our campus beyond just our student body and faculty and staff. And we occupy around 200 buildings that go from historic buildings original to the university all the way up to brand new state-of-the-art buildings. So we have trouble choosing bins sometimes for that kind of diverse campus. Next slide, please. So early on, I was able to identify the shortcomings of our existing program to collect the castaways from moves. And our status quo is really just to provide mixed paper recycling bins when they were requested. You know, we were really reacting to the situation instead of trying to get ahead of it. And so in the winter of 2013, our School of Public Health vacated their building, about a 55,000 square foot building, and right away some failures of our current program were identified, because after they had supposedly moved out, we got 50 64-gallon roll carts of mixed paper and 8 containers of hardcover books to recycle, which was really tons of paper that was left behind. So I knew we needed to do something different. Next slide, please. So the real test, luckily I'd learned some lessons from the public health school, but the real test was our business school, a 408,000 square foot building, was planning to move into a new facility, and so I tried to get ahead of it. I developed a customized information sheet that talked about what could be included in our mixed paper stream, and included some stuff on there about other opportunities for recycling beyond mixed paper, but it was just kind of, again, by request. And then made sure that we had the capacity to handle that kind of volume. So we bought about 100 more roll carts just to handle the capacity in that building, knowing that we needed to replace them eventually on campus, so it wasn't just for that, but planning for the future. And the results were great. We filled 600 roll carts, removed over 60 tons of paper over that 6-month period, but on the next slide, we still had problems in the program. So I'll just go through these pictures one by one. That top left picture is, I like to call it the hurricane move, where it appears that the furniture has been removed and everything that was on top of it has just been left on the floor. And that's actually tame to what we've seen in some buildings. And that's a mix of office supplies and some paper and trash, all sorts of things. Then that dumpster, that's our brown dumpsters are for trash, MSW on campus, and you can see there's a lot of cardboard. All those cardboard boxes were full of binders, full of paper. Then in the middle, you can see where somebody has decided to recycle brand new reams of paper. Top right, that's one of our recycling crew members, and they're just video cassettes in the mixed paper bin. In this bottom right corner is we picked up 2 trash bags, giant trash bags, from a professor who's cleaning out her office, and you can see it filled 2 96-gallon roll carts. There was some random recyclables in that little 7-gallon desk side bin, and then just that tiny little 7-gallon bin of trash, and that's mainly padded envelopes. So we were still getting a lot of stuff that didn't go where it was being put. Next slide. And this is the worst. These are 2 rooms in the our old business school. That top picture is about 1,800 binders. 3-ring binders are just, it's like they multiply, at least on our campus. So, and they were just left behind. And then the bottom picture is an adjoining room, and there we filled 3 or 4 Gaylord boxes just of desk paper organizers. And then something else that over this course of time I realized is that these office cleanouts are happening all the time, not on this scale, but we just needed to still get ahead of the game. Next slide, please. So I went back to the drawing board and realized that moving is stressful, that people are lazy, and came up with the idea of the zero waste bin. And basically, so on the left are what our zero waste bins look like now. They're just, I think they're 55-gallon Rubbermaid toters, and we end up with those because we have a Granger store on campus and they were readily available. And then the label on the right just talks about all the stuff that you can put in there, and it's basically anything is what I tell people. But we want office supplies, household items, technology, anything that has reuse value or perhaps recycling value, but you know, something like cables and toner cartridges that we don't have bins for necessarily on campus. Next slide, please. And made another information sheet that I distribute whenever I get a request or hear about a move. I send them the mixed paper information sheet and also tell them about this zero waste program. And what my thinking is that it eliminates the decision for them and it eliminates the guilt. We've started labeling our trash cans, or at least our new ones, with landfill, and I feel like there's good guilt there that people see landfill and don't want to necessarily throw something in it. But this gives them another option. So it's really reduced the contamination in our mixed paper stream. It's really simple, and it helps to share the load of getting it out of the building, where before we were sweeping a building after it was supposedly vacated, and then we had to get it all out. We're still getting it out, but at least it's in a bin. The bins are on wheels, and we can get them back pretty easily to our facility. Next slide, please. So what kinds of things do we get? And I'll tell you that well, I guess I'll tell you as I go through the pictures, but we get dishes, we get vases. That middle top picture is a Gaylord box filled with everything that's really pre-sorted. So we've got bags and looks like clothes and all sorts of stuff. We get stuffed animals. Along the bottom, we get tons and tons of binders. We get ink and toner cartridges and those desk organizers. I don't know why they don't move them. They probably buy new ones when they get to their new place. But anyway, we have them. Next slide. And how do we deal with it? The main thing is you have to have some space to store this because it's a several-step process. We've taken on the burden of redistributing this, so we've got to figure out how to sort it, and you need some storage space. Luckily, we had a unit of our library that moved out right next door to my office, actually, and I got some great storage space to do the sorting. We use cheap labor to sort it, so student volunteers, temps, downtime, because you know it's not worth expensive labor to get through this stuff. And then we try and reuse it on campus. So the Medical University of South Carolina actually has a great program for having kind of swap shops for their office supplies. So we're trying to model that on that. And then we have some existing events that we can get rid of stuff. We started last year with during new student orientation to have a Gamecocks Recycle event where we line up those binders and offer them. A lot of textbooks now need big 3-inch binders, and we have them, so we just give them back to the students. We, every year for move out, both in the winter after first semester and the big one in the summer, we have a yard sale that we call Give It Up for Good, and so we can get rid of, that's the bottom picture on the right. You can see all the coffee makers. Those often don't get moved either. And we end up with recyclables in those cans in the zero waste bin, so we recycle those, and there is some trash. Transparencies are we get a lot of those, so we end up just throwing those out. Next slide, please. And that's it. So we've been doing this since about April of this year and have had some great success with it. I will say that it's too early to say that this is an institutionalized program, so we're still tweaking it and figuring out how to run it, but it's working so far well for us.
Great, Larry. Thank you so much. Hey, I've got a couple of little questions that really focus on what you're doing here. And it's basically, how do you sustain this using temp and volunteer labor from students? And how do you prevent this project from overtaking your regular recycling operations?
Those are great questions that probably remain, the answer remains to be seen. But one reason that we've been very successful this summer is, and we've had a lot of big moves on campus, is I've had 2 student temps who, one, are excited about this, so they're not, they're going back to school in a week or so, and it didn't, it wasn't the only thing they were doing. And then, since we haven't really been operating this during the school year, I get student conduct, community service volunteers from time to time, and this will be something that they'll do. And there's a good possibility that it's just going to get overwhelming. But so far, under pretty high stress conditions this summer, it's worked out pretty well so far.
Great. One other question. How much did you pay for the bins, and how much did the campus invest in this program?
Okay, so we started out, I had some leftover roll carts that had been used at our football stadium that we couldn't use anywhere else because they didn't have the automatic tipper fronts. And so I started out just using them, and then the program got so popular that's when I had to buy some bins, and I believe they were about $70 a piece. So we have about $600 invested in the program so far, not including labor, of course. And my thing is that it helps for them to be on wheels. So you could use the brute tote. So you can. This worked for us because we had stuff lying around that we could reuse. We are starting to have to invest some into it, but it's minimal when you consider that we've got about 1,000 paper roll carts on campus. The 20 zero waste bins are not that huge an investment.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Larry. I'm sure, again, there are going to be a lot of questions more generated. We'll save those for the end of the presentations. Moving on forward to the opening slide for Matthew. Matthew Hirota joined the team of UC Merced in 2011 as the Waste Reduction Recycling Coordinator. During his first year, he accelerated the recycling program by using multimedia and social networking to engage the staff and students. He also implemented a composting program that was able to capture pre-consumer and post-consumer food waste, as well as compostable food packaging, making UC Merced one of the first organizations in the Merced County to implement food waste composting. He has established partnerships with local businesses to increase diversion to hard-to-recycle items such as styrofoam and plastic bags. Matt's hard work, forward-thinking, and tireless efforts are helping UC Merced reach its goal of being the first educational institution to produce zero landfill waste, which they plan to achieve by the year 2020. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you. So my topic is on smart waste bins, and we're just going to go over a few of the struggles that we're experiencing here in Merced. Next slide. We have about 18 of these what we call R2D2 bins along Scholars Lane, which is our main area at UC Merced, and we would constantly have these bins overflowing. Students would have special events. We have some food trucks on campus, and the bins would overflow. They'd make a mess, and we were trying to figure out what can we do to prevent this problem. And so let's go to the next slide. We also would notice that trash would be on the ground, and we thought it was just from the bins overflowing. But what we noticed is that you can see that recycle bin there. It's not overflowing. We have this trash on the ground, and we suspected that there was something else going on. Maybe somebody was pulling the material out of the bins. And so go to the next one. Yeah, and so what we found was that when we came early in the morning, we found raccoons were around, and we figured that they might be going in there and pulling some of the material out. And so we thought that they were the raccoons. And then students started taking these pictures. And so on Facebook and Instagram, you'll see a lot of pictures at UC Merced of these raccoons inside of our containers. But they got to be a bit of a problem because the raccoons became so tame that our custodians and our grounds crew actually weren't able to take the trash out. They'd lift the lid and they'd see a raccoon inside the container, but the raccoon would just look at one of our employees and then just keep eating. They wouldn't actually bother getting out. And next slide here. We also had a problem with contamination. We didn't have very good signs on the bins. They were color-coded, blue for recycling and gray for trash. And we had a little sticker on there that let people know what to put in them. But in the trash and recycle, it's just a mix of everything. We had compostable items, recyclable items, as well as trash. And we actually didn't have any compost bins outdoor as well. And so we looked at different solutions. And next slide, please. We decided to go with solar-powered compacting units. These were the Big Belly from Big Belly Solar. And this seemed to help a lot. It was more difficult for the raccoons to get inside. And we were able to have the posters in the front, and it solved a lot of our problems. Next slide. With these solar compactors, they have a cell chip in them. So these machines can let me know when they're about to get full or when they're completely full. This is an online interface that you can see on the web. You can access it anywhere you have the internet. They also have an app so I can see it on my phone. And you can see those green dots. Each one of those little green circles is actually a unit. And so we have them in sets of 3, recycle, compost, landfill. So you can see all the sets there, and they appear green, so it shows that they're not full yet. It also has has the efficiency level, and it shows us a bunch of other information. Also, it'll let me know if they're not working correctly. I also can check from my phone. I can see what the status of the battery is. Very interactive. Next slide. And so once we installed these units, we had way less contamination. People were able to get the materials into the correct bins than our previous bins. Next one. And so one of the big things that helped was actually having the signs on the units. We're not able to put the signs at eye level because that's where the solar panel is, and so we put them just below the handle. We do have pictures of the main objects that would go inside each container. And another thing that we never thought of is the fact that these have a handle on them. People can't do what I would call a drive-by drop, and so they can't just throw their material in any container. They actually have to pause for a split second, and that sometimes makes them think about what they're doing. And so that having that handle on the container significantly decreased our contamination. We also have it the correct colors there as well. We have the blue for recycling, green for compost, and the black for landfill. And we have standard symbols on each of those containers as well. And so I think all those things together really decreased our contamination. Next slide. So the highlights of the Big Belly are that it emails me when it is reaching capacity and also emails me when it is completely full. And so sometimes there are events that we don't know about, and I'll start getting emails because all these bins are filling up. So instead of having overflow issues and trash in the ground and blowing all over, we're able to send someone out there, get the bags changed, and so we don't have issues of trash. It's also nice because it compacts the material, and so we don't have to go out as often. They are raccoon-proof so far. We do have raccoons that we've seen that are actually trying to open the doors. They know how to use the handles, and we see their paw prints actually on the handles as well. But so far, they've not been able to pick the locks. There's also less trash in the ground, as I was saying, and we have minimal overflow issues, seeing as that when they are starting to get full, it will email me. Next slide. Some of the lessons we learned is that compost needs to be emptied every other day. When we first got these, we just were waiting for the units to email me when they were full. The problem with that is it gets really nasty. Any kind of waste material that contains food residue will attract cockroaches, flies, maggots. In the fall season, we had a real issue with gnats. You'd open the door, and a bunch of little teeny flies would come out into your face. And so we decided that instead of waiting until they're completely full, we collect them every other day. We also have an issue with the circuit boards, and so about 4 out of the 18 circuit boards died in the first year. I'm not sure of other universities if they have the same problem. The other University of California locations in California don't seem to have this problem. We are in a high heat area. In the summer it gets up to over 100 for several days in a row, and so that could be one of the problems. They were covered under the 1-year warranty, and I would recommend these if you have high traffic areas. They work the best. Next slide. Nothing is perfect. We still have issues with people who have objects that wouldn't necessarily fit in these. We had a 5150 decide to come here and give away a bunch of energy drinks, and they just more or less threw their boxes in front because they didn't want to take them apart. We do have people that will take a cardboard box and flatten it, and it can fit inside these units. Some larger pieces of trash, recycling, or compost would not be able to get inside. So we do have on occasion stuff that is left beside these units. Next slide. So the labor comparison, our previous bids that you saw at the beginning were collected 1 to 2 times a day, and they had also spent a lot of time cleaning up the trashes blown across the campus. When the units overflowed, the wind would blow it around. Also, when the raccoons would get into it, that trash would blow around as well. So the bins we had before, about 624 hours a year we spent in collection. With the solar compactors, we collect them every other day. If you didn't have compost you could get away with and you didn't mind the smell, you could probably collect them once a week or once every 2 weeks, depending on how busy that area is. We do have to clean these. The top of them gets really dusty. We are in the Central Valley here, so we get a lot of dust blowing around, so we clean them almost every other day to just make them look nice. But even with that cleaning, it's about half the amount of hours per year as the other bins. Next slide. So the labor savings versus cost. If you were paying someone $40 an hour, it cost approximately $12,000, a little over $12,000 a year, and so we're saving because we're doing about half the amount of labor to collect the material. We're saving almost a little over $12,000 a year. For a set of 3 of these units, it's $12,000, so they're about $4,000 each. And so for us, it looks like it'll pay for itself in 6 years. And next slide. Oh, that's me. If you have any questions regarding what we're doing or these units, I can be reached by email or telephone, and you can visit our website too. Some more information there as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. There were a lot of questions about the cost of the Big Belly solar compactors. And so did you have any initial upfront cost, or did you finance it? I know it sounds like you're paying out of savings, but were there some mechanism by which you got them approved or handled that financing up front?
So the people at UC Merced who makes the decisions, they looked at the cost savings, and you've got to be very careful with that, because if you do have gross stuff, you can't pick it up every, once a week or every 2 weeks. It should be picked up every day. They are, $4,000 each unit. So when they looked at the numbers, the cost savings and labor, it just penciled out. And I was very skeptical, to be honest. I didn't think we should spend that amount of money. But if you look at the numbers, and we do spend way less labor on that. It depends also on how much you're paying for labor. If you're paying, minimum wage for collection, it may not. It'll take a lot of time to pay for itself.
Great. So there was one last question. Did anyone lose their position because you were able to maximize your efforts through reducing collection?
No, we have a big build project. We're supposed to double our university size by 2020, and so we have instead of No one lost their position. They're doing other jobs that they were not able to do before. We had actually a lack of labor, and so no one lost their job.
That's great to know. Thank you, Matthew. Very interesting program. Now we'll move on to Kris Ferguson. Kris has been with the recycling coordinator at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. since 2013. Prior to that, he owned his own solid waste recycling consulting business and worked as a consultant for various private sector companies. Kris is married and has a 3-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter. He is currently on the board of Keep Virginia Beautiful, where he helps find solutions to the intentional proliferation of litter while focusing on increasing the state's recycling efforts. Kris holds a master's degree in natural resources from Virginia Polytech and State University. Welcome, Kris.
Yes, thanks for the introduction, Kay, and thank you to all the attendees in the audience as well. As Kay stated, I'm the recycling coordinator at George Washington University, and we're located in the heart of Washington, D.C., only a few blocks away from the White House. So we're in a very pretty location, but we have a lot of unique challenges that we face. So today I'm here to share a big picture overview of how the university, how we rebooted our recycling and diversion programs to adapt to those unique set of challenges that we face here. So among some of the other zero waste initiatives that we've taken on, two of the more critical ones that I'll be discussing today include a redesign or a remodel of both our trash and recycling containers and the corresponding signage. So on this slide that you guys are looking at, the campus statistics, you can see GW has been in existence for almost 200 years. We have 3 campuses. The main one is Foggy Bottom. 2 of them are in DC, one of them is in Virginia. And as you can see by the demographics, we truly are a global melting pot here. Again, one of our more unique challenges is that we are an open campus. So while we have control over our students, our faculty, our staff, we also have to account for what I call our transient population. And that includes government employees, office employees, and just other pedestrians who use our streets. Next slide, please. Before I jump into this slide, I just wanted to say that at George Washington, if there's an opening anywhere on campus, our students will fill it with trash. I'm sure you guys have the same problems. No matter how good our signage is, someone will inevitably throw something that they shouldn't into it. And I don't know if you can see this clearly in the picture, but this is a photograph of our Max R e-cycling tower that some students were kind enough to throw their beer cans in. As you can see, it's meant for batteries, and I guess the circular picture looked like a beer can, but when we serviced it the other day, it was mostly full of beer cans. With that being said, prior to 2013, our university had a dual stream collection program, but there was not an ideal oversight or understanding of the entire solid waste and recycling system, or even how to boost our participation rates. So in 2013, the university decided to transition to a single stream system to streamline the program, but they realized when they were going to do this that they needed subject matter experts to help. And from this, I guess I could say the university recognized the need to hire full-time employees to oversee the trash and recycling component of these programs. Next slide, please. Okay. So these are photos, or these photos, I should say, are indicative of some of the problems that we faced before the transition. As you can see, there's multiple types of containers. The lids are all different. The openings aren't similar. And the type of materials that the signage says can be collected could not actually be collected in those specific containers. So this was confusing to the students. And of course, there was no standard containers for either the residence halls, the academic buildings, or some of the administrative buildings as well. For example, if you look at the top left corner of the slide, we had fiberglass containers here for a dual stream program. Underneath it, We had another set of containers to the bottom right. We had what we call a 3-tier system. It was just really confusing. There was no standard for when a student walked into a building. What do I do with my bottle and can? Where do I put my paper, or where do I put my trash? Next slide, please. In addition to the containers, there was also no dedicated universal signage that was available. What signage that we had was either incorrect, it was confusing, it was ineligible, and this was basically perforated throughout the entire university. So one of my favorite pictures is, it's difficult to see in this slide, but the top left corner says trash, but directly underneath it there's a recycling sign, and it says something along the lines of please recycle here. So again, very confusing messaging. The center picture shows that someone had just put up their own poster that said please use the trash chute here. And then our big bellies, which we have about, I believe it's 18 sets on campus, just said bottles and cans and trash, but it didn't specifically say for the trash what could go in there, nor does it account for the fact that we're actually single stream campus. So you could have put paper and other fibers in that recycling section. Next slide, please. So what's the solution? Well, in order to address all these concerns that the university had, they really made it a priority to hire a zero waste team. And the zero waste team consisted of Andres Harris, and he was the solid waste and recycling manager at LSU, Louisiana State University, for the past 8 years before he came on board in November of 2013. They hired myself, and we actually hired a department assistant by the name of Miles. And Miles had 5 years of experience at George Washington, both as a student as well as a green leader, so he really understood the dynamics of the university more so than Andres and I when we came on board. Next slide, please. So once we came on board, the first thing we had to do was get a basic understanding of the current program. And this entailed working with the Department of Sustainability, housekeeping, design and marketing, and of course various green student groups on campus. And I guess once we had that basic understanding, it was clear to us that our indoor and outdoor containers, as well as the signage, were inconsistent with the university sustainability goals. So over a period of time, we sat down and we game planned steps we needed to take to move forward. And this game plan followed the 8 steps listed on this slide. Now some of these steps intermingled with one another, but for the most part they were fairly ideal, at least to George Washington. And one of the most important steps were steps 2 and 5. Number 1, for step 2, we had to create a standard for our bins and our signage. We had to understand, what worked best at the university and why, and then come up with a list of standards that we ended up running by various other stakeholders before we settled on what we wanted to use, and ditto for our posters displaying our signage. Also, step number 5, identify funding mechanisms. I can't stress how important this is. If we didn't have the dedicated funding that the university gave to us, there's no way we could have advanced a lot of our initiatives and our causes. So we were very fortunate to have a funding source available to us. Next slide, please. So what did we come up with? Well, these are all of our new signage and posters that we developed for both the indoor as well as our outdoor solid waste containers. As you can see, they're pretty clear and they're concise, and they have photos. We found at George Washington that our students were always in a rush, and they really tend not to read unless it's their iPhone, so the photographs were a big help. So the top left corner, we developed our trash signage. So not only does it have photographs, but it has the text to the right and to the left of the pictures, so if students do want to take the time to read, they can. Ditto for our single stream recycling program. We developed a poster that has photographs and text. Our food waste, our electronics recycling program, and our trash chutes also had brand new signage and posters developed that we put all throughout all 3 of our campuses. So they're basically everywhere. Now, whenever you see a container on campus, you'll either have this poster above the container, or in a lot of cases it'll be a sticker that'll be pasted onto the container itself. Next slide, please. So the goal was to narrow down and focus on our user needs. And I mentioned this previously, but in conjunction with the new signage, we also developed a list of acceptable indoor and outdoor containers. I said we ran it by the stakeholders. We really had to do it with our planning development and construction departments, because they're the ones who, when new buildings are constructed, they have to set aside a budget to purchase these. So one thing that I found is when I first got here, I made an effort to visit other universities in our backyard. One of them was American University, and they had these great containers called ergo cans, and that's in the top left corner of the slide. And these cans are terrific. I believe they're 30 or 32 gallons each, and you work with the company, and they will either design their own single-stream recycling or trash posters, or you can give them whatever they use, and they make cardboard cutouts that slide into the container themselves. We love these. The students really enjoy them. We've had a lot of good press from the parents, and our housekeeping staff really enjoys these as well. We also made sure that we had Slim Jims in our public areas. We had 96-gallon toters, and every desk side unit has either a 7-gallon or 3.5-gallon trash and recycling bin, depending on how many people sit at that cubicle. Lastly, at the bottom right, we ended up purchasing these, I'll call them expensive trash and recycling units. They're a stainless steel design. They're about $1,500, so they're out of the price range of many of our buildings, except for our high-end ones. But they're very nice, and they stay clean, even though they're a sheet metal. They're easy to keep clean. Next slide, please. We also wanted to create a map indexing all of our external trash and recycling litter receptacles across campus. So this map, I know it's difficult to see, but we pinpointed where all of our Victor Stanley litter receptacles and all of our big belly solar compactors were on the outside of the buildings. Next slide. So this slide shows the photos of those exterior litter receptacles. Prior to our arrival, the Victor Stanley units were placed throughout campus, and there was really no rhyme or reason to their layout. Many areas had a trash unit, but they didn't have a recycling one, or they may have had 2 trash or 2 recycling, but it wasn't consistent. Not to mention the majority of the lids were faded or didn't exist at all, or the opening for the recyclables was incorrect. The signage was incorrect. So what we did was after audit, we got a new plan to remove all the duplicative and unnecessary units. And then we also worked with Victor Stanley to design brand new rain bonnet lids with an extra wide lip. What we found is a lot of folks, when we first ordered these lids, we had a smaller opening, and a lot of times the bottles and cans would get stuck on the lip and it wouldn't actually go into the container. So we worked with Victor Stanley to expand these, and now they're much easier to put your waste into. We also have signs on top of our lids that dedicate what that waste stream is for: trash only, recycling, etc. So the pictures on the left show a before, and the pictures on the right show an after. Next slide, please. So what did all of our new signage and posters and containers and everything else, has that been successful? Well, some preliminary results indicate that our contamination rate alone has dropped from about 30% to 10%. Now, this sort of ticks back up over the summer months because we have a lot of international students, and a lot of these students either aren't used to recycling in their home countries or they just can't understand our signage. So next year we plan on placing signs throughout the campus in various languages so the students are aware, oh, that's what this container is for. We also found that our overall recycling rate increased by 6 points between fiscal year 2014 and fiscal year 2015. Next slide, please. So to conclude, this slide just sort of shows some of the lessons that we learned, sometimes via the hard way, I like to say. But number one is patience, patience, patience. Your system's not going to improve overnight. It's not going to be an immediate success. We've been here since November of 2013, and while we've made a lot of strides, we still have a long ways to go. Second is really involve all the stakeholders who your decisions affect. We brought our housekeepers on board, our event staff, our student organizations, etc. They all came to the table with us, and we sat down and we game planned. Collaborate across different higher ed entities. Again, we work with the University of Maryland. We work with American University. We just have so many partners in this region that we can bounce ideas off of. We visit each other's campus. We know each other. It makes things a lot easier. So to conclude, we're past the hard part, but from here on out, it's really just staying true to our vision and making sure that we know where we want to be in the next 2 to 5 years. So with that said, I will conclude. Thank you.
Kris, thank you so much. There was several questions about funding, and you did put it up as one of the top things that you did in your planning stages, and that you actually had dedicated budget for this project. Can you give us a few more specifics?
Absolutely. Let me just break this up into 2 parts, if you would. The first part is before we came on board, we had our facilities director specifically tell us that they had a certain amount of budget available, and if we ended up if that budget wasn't enough, we could ask them, and they would incrementally increase it. We work with Grainger to get the best prices available because, obviously as a university we do have a tight budget, but Grainger helps out. We have a rule on campus where we have to get a quote for containers from 3 different entities. A lot of times we'll bounce them off of one another. For instance, if Grainger comes in and says, we'll give you a Slim Jim for $20, I may call up Bush Systems and say, they're offering it to us for $20, what's your best price? So don't be afraid to involve various vendors in this. Second to that, when we came on board, the electronics program, the e-waste program, the university was spending upwards of $7,000 a month to take the electronics, which were rightfully ours, and ship them to Texas, of all places, to be processed via a third-party vendor. We saw that and we said, no, that's not how it works in this business. So we worked with a company called E-Asset Solutions, which is local to us in Falls Church, and they now pay us, as opposed to us paying to get rid of our electronics. They pay us for our electronics. We also get money for scrap metal. So all this money that we've got coming into us, we have a dedicated fund where that will actually go into to help us buy containers, to help us buy signage, to help us advance our zero waste goals.
That's really good. One of the things, another question that was asked is, do you have goals for uniformity? I did notice that you have uniformity in all your signage, but your bins are all different. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. One of the things I wanted to do is put our list of standards in this PowerPoint presentation that we developed. It shows the brand name, the type, the model number, which buildings they're for, which rooms they're for. Unfortunately, it was just too big of a file to put in a PowerPoint presentation, but if anybody's interested, I'd be happy to send it off to you. It's not proprietary at all, and I could send it off as a PDF document, and it will give you an indication of once we visited all of our different buildings on campus and the different rooms and stuff, what we came up for each room, and that is standard. So the pictures on the slide, they don't really show everything, but I just try to present some photos of what we use on campus. So it is a standardized system based on the building and the location within the building. It's just it was difficult to do that in a PowerPoint.
Thank you so much, Kris. We appreciate it so much. Let's go to the opening slide for Alec Cooley. Alec is the Director of Recycling Programs at Keep America Beautiful, where he manages public space recycling and collegiate programs. Alec has over 20 years experience in the recycling industry, having previously managed recycling programs for the Architect, and I'm not sure if I said that right, Community Recycling Center and Humboldt State University in Northern California. Alec currently lives in Charleston, South Carolina. Welcome, Alec.
Great. Thanks, Kay, and thanks everybody for joining today. So what I'm going to talk about is not a specific case study from any one campus, but I want to share some research that our organization recently published this last spring, talking about some of the bin dynamics in an office setting at desk side, and trying to put some hard numbers behind what we've seen a lot of anecdotal evidence when you change around the type of desk side service that's provided to office staff, what can be done to show an improvement in recycling. If we go to the next slide. So real quickly, what we did, we worked with a company called Action Research and several other partners to look at different office settings that were not specifically college and universities, but they, I think, nonetheless offer good information that's relevant for office staff, faculty on a college campus. We were looking at what can increase recycling, how can we reduce contamination in trash bins, and how do we get stuff, just get the recyclables out of the actual trash bins. So what I'm going to do is just give you a quick overview of what we did and how we and the results that we found, and then I'll point folks to where they can find the actual research study behind this. Next slide, please. So what we specifically did is we looked at what type of bin setup at a desk side, again, could influence behavior. And you'll see there are 4 conditions that we tried. The first was to give folks a normal sized recycling bin, and then a small trash bin that clipped onto the side of it. And you can see in that the upper left-hand photo, the little gray bin that clips on. She's dropping a banana peel into it. Then we also tried, we tested with 2 recycling and trash bins that were equal size. We tried removing the trash bin altogether and just leaving someone with the recycling bin, and instead instructing them to go to a centralized drop-off area for trash within the office area. And then the fourth, we worked with whatever the existing infrastructure happened to be in that given location, and all we did was to provide information. We provided flyers and background about the program, just trying to inform them about how it operated to refresh their knowledge. Next slide. Throughout all of this, one of the key things we did, because we wanted to make sure that we had this consistency to remove this as a variable and what was influencing behavior. So with all the bins, we had consistent signage. We also did this with the centralized bins in those same office locations. And this just shows you the bin standard that we used, as well as the signage that went onto the centralized bins. The actual desk side smaller bins simply had the symbols that you see at the top, the recycling with the Mobius and cans of bottles, and then the trash can. Next slide. We tested this out in 4 different cities in 34 different office locations. So we wanted to get a broad-based idea of beyond simply looking at one single location. Next slide. So as part of this, we did 6 months worth of waste audits. Once each month, we did initially for several months before we changed the treatment to get the baseline numbers. So whatever existing recycling arrangement they had in that particular office location, we tested that out, got the baseline numbers before we changed it, and then we tested. Again, we monitored the waste stream for several months afterward. We were looking at specifically what was the total weight of material that was coming through each of the different bin setups. We were testing the specific recyclable materials that we were putting onto the flyers that we handed out for background information. And then we also did a count of the actual number of cans and bottles specifically as a second set of data. Next slide. So what we found was that overwhelmingly the arrangement where you had a large recycling bin at the desk side and then the small trash, in this case for the study, we specifically looked at the bins, the small ones that clip onto the side of the bin, but I think a lot of this this information could also extend to some of the other smaller bins, like the mini bin system. I think could also be fairly applied to that. But what we found was that it did not. There was not a fundamental change in the quantity of material showing up into the recycling bin, but what we had was correct recycling, a dramatic improvement. And as you can see there, we found that the percentage of recyclables that were going into the trash bin went down from 29 to 13%, and vice versa. It was traded out so that we were having less contamination going into the recycling. So basically, that roughly 13 to 30% material just found itself going into the correct bin, whereas before it was going the wrong direction. So that was a pretty dramatic improvement. We were excited about. One of the other, I think, key things we found from this was that whereas with roughly 79 to 80% of the different offices experiencing where there was paper showing up, recyclable paper showing up in the trash bins, with this particular treatment, that went down to almost zero. And I think intuitively we can all understand that when you have a receptacle that's too small to physically put a full sheet of paper into, people just naturally migrate towards the recycling bin. So that was also important information. Next slide. Real quick, I'll just explain what we found from the other arrangements as well. When you had two equal-sized recycling and trash, we definitely saw some benefit there. It did not increase the amount of recyclables going into the trash, but it definitely reduced contamination. So that was a net plus, but it did not have quite the same impact. Next slide. And interestingly, we had the least success when you took away the trash bin altogether and you just left someone with a recycling bin. You'll actually notice that second bullet there. We actually saw the percentage of recyclables going into the trash increase, even though it required people having to go to a centralized bin to do it. And I think one can dive into the data and surveys to better understand what was behind that. But I think on a certain level, people just don't like having that taken away from them, having that trash service. So that was an interesting result. The last treatment where we simply gave people more information but kept with their existing system did not have any real measurable effect, which is not to say that there is not value to doing consistent education and reminding folks about this is how the system works. But simply in this situation, we weren't seeing that by itself had a measurable impact on people's behavior. Next slide. So we have the full study, as I said, can be found on our website at Recycling at Work. We also have just a 2-page fact sheet that gives a high-level overview of these results. I think the key thing for us that comes from this is we've seen a lot of schools have tried similar types of arrangements where you've tinkered with the custodial service or you've tried different arrangements. And what we're excited about here is that we have real hard numbers that actually show a real impact on a scientific basis. So we encourage folks to check this out. And with that, I will finish up.
Alex, thank you so much. Hey, there were a couple of questions. Do you use, or were there liners used with the small clip-on trash container? And then the other piece to that is that when were those serviced? Were they serviced once a day or once a week, or were they serviced by the individual sitting at the desk?
Mm-hmm. Good question. So to answer the plastic liner, my recollection, in each case we were working with 34 different offices, and I believe most of those we did not use a plastic liner with the trash. But that's something that would be we would be able to tell you for sure from the actual study details. And in terms of the custodial service, or how those were emptied, that was also left to the local office. So if there was, if they had an existing arrangement with their custodial contractor we weren't necessarily changing that. So it would vary from one location to the next. To my knowledge, and again, I think the study would detail this exactly, this is not a situation where we were asking people to go empty the bins themselves outside of that one treatment where there was no trash bin. I think in all of the cases that there was custodial service coming to the desk side to empty those.
Okay. Also, did the new bins add excitement to recycling?
I think, speaking from an anecdotal, what I would say, I think, is that when you do a new system, when you introduce a new infrastructure, there's a novelty. And folks, I think, to respond to a new system, or at least pay more attention, be more cautious of it for a period of time, and then that's not necessarily going to carry forever as you get used to your arrangement. But I would not say that would have a measurable major impact on what we were finding with the study.
One last question on that. Were any of those small clip-on bins for compost, or were you using compost in this system, or was it just recycling and trash?
Good question. For this study, we just focused on recycling and trash. We did not attempt to target organics simply because we wanted to stay focused on that one core question. So this was all these locations where we did the study did not have organic collection systems in place. They only had trash and or recycling.
Okay. One other question about this. Also included in the option, have you ever just removed all containers desk side and opted for more common area containers?
It's a fair question. We did not do that with this study. It was something that was discussed during the original design, and I know there have definitely been a lot of colleges that have gone down that route, but we did not specifically test that with this study.
Great.
I'd be happy, if folks are interested, I'm happy to refer you to schools that I'm aware of who have done that. And whether they have solid data behind it, they can at least share their anecdotal experience.
Okay. Are there any other questions out there? I think that wraps up any questions that I've received so far. All right. Let's move forward then. I have a few closing housekeeping notes to share with everyone. Following this webinar today, you should receive a prompt to complete a quick survey about the conference. We encourage you to take a minute to give us feedback on today's program. Let's go to the next slide on future webinars. We have 2 more webinar programs in our 2015 series. Our next program in October will be Learning Planning for Success, Strategic Planning to Build a Comprehensive Recycling Program, on Thursday, October 8th from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. In this webinar, we will focus on using strategic planning methods to grow your campus waste reduction program and align it with the broader campus strategic plan. The program will feature presentations from Johns Hopkins University and Tennessee State University, and later a third school will be announced. For full details and to register for this and the December program that's upcoming, visit the CURC website at www.curc.org. That's www.curc.org. Now on our very last slide, or third to the last slide here, for those of you planning to attend ASHE Higher Education Sustainability Conference this fall, plan to come a day earlier for the CURC Annual Zero Waste Workshop. The all-day workshop will be hosted on the University of Minnesota campus on Sunday, October 25th. The program will include case study presentations, roundtable discussions, a tour of the school's recycling program, and opportunities to network with fellow campus recyclers. Sign up for the workshop through the ASHE conference registration system. The next slide. We have a great announcement for a scholarship. CURC is pleased to offer scholarships this year to help with student leadership attending the workshop. If you have an intern, student worker, or recent graduate who is interested in pursuing a career in the sustainability field, encourage them to apply for one of the 4 $250 stipends to help cover transportation and other related costs. Students will need to submit their request pretty quickly here by August 25th to be eligible. For full details and to submit an application, visit the CURC website again at www.curc3r.org. And very lastly, again, we want to recognize our sponsors and partners for making these programs possible. Thank you to Recycle Mania for sponsoring today's program, as well as the Alcoa Foundation for support in their overall 2015 series. Finally, our thanks go to KAB, or Keep America Beautiful, for the planning and logistics support, and ASHE as a promotional partner for the series. One last time, I want to thank our presenters today, Josh, Larry, Matt, Kris, and Alec. Have a great afternoon, everyone.